Ecclesiastes 10, verses 8 through 11 tonight. Ecclesiastes 10, 8 through 11. It says, "He who digs a pit will fall into it, and a serpent will bite him who breaks through a wall. He who quarries stones is hurt by them, and he who splits logs is endangered by them. If the iron is blunt and one does not sharpen the edge, he must use more strength, but wisdom helps one to succeed. If the serpent bites before it is charmed, there is no advantage to the charmer." In this section, and for a little while longer here in Ecclesiastes, for maybe another couple weeks of what we look at, you'd think you're back in Proverbs. It's some words of wisdom that are coming directly from Solomon and, of course, inspired by the Holy Spirit. And so we see these Proverbs here that are put in Ecclesiastes, and it tells us some stuff that we really should remember. First, in verses 8 and 9, remember we need to be careful and use wisdom. We need to be careful and use wisdom. It says, "He who digs a pit will fall into it." You know what's happening if you're not careful? If you're not careful when you dig a pit, you know what you'll do? You'll fall into it. All right. I remember when we had maybe been in our house for a couple years and started here, and every time you flushed the toilet, every time you ran the sink, every time you ran the bath water, or you emptied the bath water, and you'd start to hear bloop, 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 bloop. We're like, okay, that doesn't sound good, right? And then it's like, okay, let's get everything checked out. Well, it's time for the septic tank to get pumped. And the first guy that came over there, he could not find where the septic tank was. And he was just worried. He said, "I can't find it." He stuck that little thing in the ground. He says, "I can't find the septic tank." He started digging holes in the yard. And he's like, "Maybe I'll find it this way." And so he's digging holes in the yard. And he says, "I'm going to go under the house and I'm going to see where the lines go out. Maybe that'll give me a better idea." And he opened up and he crawled in about halfway in. He come back out. He said, "You're going to have to call somebody else. There's snake skin under there." All right? Because he was worried about it. So he left. We had another guy come out. He took the little rod and he came out, and first time he put it in, he goes, "Oh, there it is." And then he pulled it up and they pumped it out, and it was just like that. But the guy that dug all the holes, I guess when he saw the snake skin there, he was kind of worried about it. And so he just left, right? And he left the holes. Guess whose leg found one of those holes in the dark one time when I was trying to walk out there with something? I had the flashlight, but I still missed the hole. That was me. I found it, right? I fell into the pit. So not only can you fall into the pit when you dig it if you're not careful, I might fall into the pit when you dig it if you are not careful. It was funny. I was glad that Martha wasn't there to see me because she would have laughed so hard. But she was inside, so that happens. Sometimes you got to use wisdom, right? You got to be safe when you do it. You got to be safe. If you're going to get up and work on a roof, make sure you don't wear slick shoes. Make sure you wear a harness if you need to wear a harness, depending on how high it is. All those things. Take the proper precautions, because that's what wisdom is. You can imagine, too, if you were digging a pit and you happen to dig in a little too far, maybe to one side, and you hit a place where a snake could crawl down in, and the snake was living. What's the snake going to do? You think he's going to be happy that you busted a hole in the side of his house? Probably about the same as we would be if somebody busted a hole in the side of our house. If they came in there like the Kool-Aid man and busted in, "Oh yeah," and coming in, and that's kind of what we did to that snake. Well, he's going to want to bite you. He's going to definitely want to bite you. So you got to be careful with it. On the same thing, you'll never guess what happened. A couple days later, I said, we probably need to fill those holes in that the guy dug in the yard, looking around. And we came around to the thing, and Martha looked in one of those holes and said, "You think we ought to fill this up?" Guess what was inside of it? What had left the snake skin under the house was down in there. And we took care of that. And I love a black snake. I think black snake's great, but black snake's not going to live under the house. Did I get amen? Okay, that's what I thought. I love black snakes. They want to be in the barn. They want to be in the woods. That's great, but you're not going to live under the house. It's just not what's going to happen. And so we took care of that. But you know very well, I was careful with that. I was careful I was doing it because even though I know a black snake's not venomous, I still don't want to get bit by one. They still give you a pretty nasty bite if they can get a hold of you. And so it says, just like you busting the wall, you're not paying attention, you're not doing what's right, it's there. Did y'all ever watch Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark? You ever see that one? That was the first Indiana Jones. And you remember when they crack it open to be able to go in there and find where the Ark of the Covenant is, and when they lift it up, he looks down and he says, "Why is the floor moving?" Well, it was snakes, right? So I think Indiana Jones didn't want to go down there, but he had to do it. So he went down there because that would have been pretty bad if the movie was over. He's like, "Nope, no snakes, I'm gone." And then they'd rolled the credits. But you got to be careful. You got to be careful. If you quarry stones, you can be hurt by them. If you split logs, you can be endangered by them. If you know somebody that has got hurt cutting wood before, raise your hand. That's just about everybody, right? I mean, it just happens. It happens. Sometimes you can go up to split the log, and when you hit it, you might hit it just right, and it bounces off something, hits you in the shin, opens you up. Or, the axe head might fly off like it did when Elisha had the guys up there, and then God performed the miracle to have it float back up to the top. You got to be careful when you do it. You got to use your mind when you're doing your work. Use your wisdom. And it's not just in these physical tasks that you might be doing. You got to use it when you navigate mental things as well and spiritual things as well. You have to always be thinking about what might happen and take the proper precautions that you need. So use your wisdom. Be careful and use your wisdom. In verse 10, you need to have the wisdom to use your tools correctly. You got to use your tools correctly, because if you don't use the tool correctly, then it's going to end up being a lot harder job for you. A whole lot harder job. He says, if the iron's blunt, one does not sharpen the edge, he must use more strength. There's nothing worse than trying to cut a tree or something like that and the tool not being sharp. He talks about an axe here. You're going to have to just chop and chop and chop and chop, and you're going to have to use so much more strength. I remember cutting trees with a chainsaw even. And at first you get started and you're like, I probably ought to sharpen this blade, but I'll see if I can get it done. And by the time at the end, you're sitting here going like this and things are starting to get smoky and it's just not cutting real good at all. And it would have been better off. You would have probably saved time to sharpen the blade or to change the blade out and then sharpen the other one. Then you would have just saying, well, I'll just try to make it go through. My grandpa, my uncles, my dad, I can't tell you how many men said this to me growing up. They said, instead of working with your tools, you have to make your tools work for you. You ever heard that before? You got to make your tools work for you. And part of that is having them in a good place. So sharpen up your axe before you hit it, and you'll be amazed at what happens. You're more likely to get cut with a dull knife than you are with a sharp knife. When you're doing something, you know why that is? Everyone's like, I don't want to sharpen it. I don't want to get cut with a sharp knife. Now, if you get cut with a sharp knife, you usually get a worse cut. Not always, but sometimes. Sometimes the dull ones kind of tear rather than cut. But if you're chopping something in the kitchen and you're doing it with a sharp knife, the knife's doing what you want it to do. But when you have a dull one and you're having to push and mash and everything, then that's when you get cut, because you're having to exert so much more force on it. Caleb and I were cooking something one time. I can't remember what it was, but we sat there and we cut, and I was like, this is so hard. And we about chopped our finger off because we were using a butcher knife. So many times I finally said, all right, enough's enough. I went in to my bedroom, opened up, got my pocket knife sharpener because that was what I had right then. And we took it and we sharpened up that butcher knife. And we got it. I said, now it's sharp. I said, give me a piece of paper. And we cut the piece of paper. I'm like, all right, it's sharp. And then we went in there, and it took us no time to finish what we were doing, because then it was cutting the way it's supposed to. Because you have to use wisdom to let your tool work for you rather than you working with the tool. Nothing wrong in having the wrong tool to try to get something done. And so we want to have the wisdom to use the right tool. He says wisdom helps you succeed. That's what it is. When you work on something and your tool's the wrong tool, or your tool's not working right, then you're going to mess up. And you're going to mess up also in life. In life, you want to know what somebody without wisdom is? It's like walking around with a dull axe. It's like trying to chop down a tree with a sledgehammer instead of an axe. And you have to work so much harder at it than if you study the Bible and you get that wisdom and you sharpen your mind. You know another thing that sharpens us together? What's the scripture say? It says, as iron sharpens iron, we sharpen each other. By being around each other, by helping each other, by having that fellowship, by sharing together the things that are going on in our lives and how God has brought us through. So we have to use our tools correctly. And then finally, in verse 11, proper preparation goes a long way. Apparently, Solomon was really thinking about snakes a lot during this time, because we get another one here, and it says, if the serpent bites before it's charmed, there is no advantage to the charmer. You know what a snake charmer does, right? You ever seen those before? I've never seen one in person. I've seen one on TV where they have the pot and they've got the cobra in there. The cobra's, of course, very, very venomous snake and very dangerous snake. But they'll be able to play the flute and they'll be able to get the snake to get up and go like this and kind of almost like the snake's dancing and it doesn't bite them. But now what happens if when you say, I'm going to charm this snake, and you've made no prep work, you've not done anything that you need to do, and then you reach forward and pow, you get hit. What good's it going to do to charm that snake now? You've already been bit by a cobra. You're in a big mess at that point. Somebody asked me one time, they said, now you're a Baptist preacher, why don't you tell me about that snake handling some of them churches do? And I said, well, you want like a theological discussion of it? I said, they're taken from the end of Mark and they're taking it more as a command than what was going to happen. I believe it was fulfilled in Acts when Paul stuck his hand into the firewood and he came back out and there was a snake attached onto him and he flung him off and he didn't die, and everybody said he's going to die, and he didn't. And so he said, you would touch a snake, you'd be bit by a snake, nothing would happen to you. And he goes, no, I'm not talking about theological. I'm talking about practical. How does snake handling work when the churches do snake handling? I said, it's real easy. You just got to keep the snakes in the refrigerator overnight. Because then when you get them out, they move real slow because they're cold-blooded and you can't do it. And every time I see him now, he's like, every time I look at you, I think about those snakes in the refrigerator. I said, that's what I do. I said, even if one did try to bite you, it'd just be like this. And you'd have plenty of time to get your hand out of the way. But you got to have some prep. Y'all remember when we did the snake handling here? I always laugh about that. I told everybody we handled snakes one Sunday. Me and Larry were I was getting ready to open the door and Larry was the first one out. And a snake came into the vestibule. We opened the door and it was like, thank you very much. And it started slithering right in. And I think my leg hurt worse than Larry's because Larry was getting it with that prosthetic leg. He was stomping on it, and I was stomping on it too because I figured it'd get in here and then we'd never be able to find the thing. And we went through there, and then they keep moving after they've died. And so I've got videos of me and Caleb and some of the other kids, some other people hold it like this where you can't see his head, but it's still moving around like we were snake handling at church. You got to make preparation though, right? You got to make preparation before you do something. When you go into something and you don't even think about it and you don't plan it out, it's usually going to be bad. It's usually not going to work out. You got to plan and you got to think about it. God gave you a brain for a reason, and you've got to use it and use the wisdom that He has given you, because if you want to accomplish something big, you have to have it in your mind and you have to have thought about it in wisdom. You have to plan it out. Too often, people will say that they want to do something. They've got an idea and they want to run with it and say, well, what's your plan? I don't have a plan. It'll come together. Not usually. Not usually it doesn't. Somebody called the office one day and had questions about a certain type of business and stuff like that. And after talking with them, answering the question, I said, I think before you start going forward, you need to do a lot more research and a lot more planning, because right now you're not ready to do what it is you want to do. And that's what we have to do sometimes ourselves, is say, okay, hold on. Let me think through this. Let me run through the scenarios in my mind. Let me think about what kind of preparation do I need to make? What kind of things do I need to have ready before I go and take off on this idea that I have? If the serpent bites before it's charmed, there's no advantage to the charmer. Proper preparation goes a long way. So be careful. Use wisdom. Use your tools correctly. Make your tools work for you. And remember that proper preparation goes a long way. And I could say proper prayerful preparation goes a long ways. Any comments or questions?